Welcome, everybody. My name is Rob Luzinski with the Stewardship Network, and we will be getting started in just a couple minutes. Thank you, everyone, for joining. If you'd like to introduce yourselves in the chat with your name, organization, and where you're tuning in from, that would be great. Seeing a lot of familiar faces in the participants list already, which is awesome. Lizzie, hello. Lori, Rachel, we got a strong TSN presence here today. That's great. Bob, behind the scenes, thank you all for all of your hard work in setting this up for us. We'll just give it another 30 seconds or so to let people start joining in, and then I will get on with my intro. Hey, Brett, upstate New York. That's great. Thank you for joining us. Brett, out of curiosity, how did you hear about the webcast today? I would love to know. Hey, Kirsten, thanks for joining. Once again, feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat if you would like, with your name, organization, and where you're tuning in from. And then I would like to remind everybody to make any comments that you have in the chat, but we'd ask you to use the Q&A functionality to ask questions, and we will save those questions until the end, and we'll have a little bit of a discussion after the presentation. And with that, I think I will close my chat and participant list, and I will go ahead and get started on the presentation. So welcome once again. My name is Rob Luzinski with the Stewardship Network, and we are here today for the monthly webcast, May 2023. So first, a little bit about us at the Stewardship Network. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization with an award-winning 20-year history. We are now serving 20+ place-based TSN member communities from the Great Lakes to the Pacific Ocean. And our free TSN webcasts happen on the second Wednesday of every month at the Eastern Time Zone's noon hour. Our mission is to connect, equip, and mobilize people and organizations to care for land and water in their communities. Field season is on, as we all know. It's a busy time, so we really appreciate you making the time to join us today. A lot of people are in the field doing prescribed burns, doing cleanups, all of the above. And so we want to talk a little bit about what we're doing for field season at the Stewardship Network. A reminder and an update that we're currently within the Stewardship Network Spring Challenge 2023, and that started on April 12th, and it will run until June 30th of this year. We ask you all to visit stewardshipnetwork.org/report in order to report your stewardship activities. And we encourage you to report early and often with our easy online form, and you can find that link above. And we shout out your rolling do more achievements and honor those that do the most at the end. So a little bit of friendly competition, but certainly appreciating everybody that participates. And we have a new aspect of the challenge this year, which is our TSN Spring Challenge Boosts, which reward regular entries into the Spring Challenge. We also have another aspect of the challenge, which is the Donate initiative. Generous donors have agreed to match all TSN donations during the Spring Challenge 1-to-1. So your $10 becomes $20, your $25 becomes $50. You get the idea. And our goal is $20,000, which will be matched and become $40,000 by June 30th. And with your help, we really believe that we can get there. This operational funding will be hugely influential in TSN's trajectory as an organization, and it will empower us to maintain our momentum. We're feeling really great about the things we've been able to do together with you all, and we want to continue doing that. Speaking of momentum, we are having some record-breaking early numbers in our Spring Challenge. We are at 1,200+ hours reported with 400+ participants and over $1,500 donated so far. So we're feeling really great this early in the challenge that we have so much enthusiasm and momentum, and we hope that you will continue to be a part of it with us. And with that, I would love to introduce Kat Superfisky, an urban ecologist with the City of Los Angeles. And Kat, I will stop sharing my screen and let you take it away.
All right, can I get confirmation that everyone can see my slide deck up on the presenter screen?
Indeed, we can. It looks great.
Perfect. All right. Well, good morning for some of you. Good afternoon for, it sounds like the majority of you. I am tuning in from Los Angeles, so it is still bright and early my time, although I was up with the birds around 5 or 6 this morning. As was mentioned, my name is Kat Superfisky, and I am the City of Los Angeles's urban ecologist. This was a role that was newly created about 4 years ago to assist the second largest city in the country with addressing ecological health within a super highly urban context. Now, if you know anything about me or read my bio, you might have recognized that I'm not actually originally from Los Angeles. I'm actually a transplant from the great mitten-shaped state of Michigan. So I'm absolutely super excited to be circling back to my friendly Michiganders, and also really, really honored to be speaking at a Stewardship Network event, because little fun fact, when I graduated from the University of Michigan back in the day and went out and started my professional career, the Stewardship Network was my first conference that I ever went to. And I remember walking away from that and my mind being blown, being like, wait, I can get paid to learn really cool things from really cool people. It was this like mind-blowing experience and extremely inspiring, and is honestly one of the reasons that still to this day, I can never say no to being one of those speakers who gets to come and share their passion and their perspective and their approach with a wider audience such as yourselves. So I'm super, super jazzed to be able to provide y'all with a little window into my world through my lenses or my nature goggles as a creative ecologist that's living in a place like Los Angeles with the mission of trying to save the planet. But before I do dive into my work in LA, like that's just when I was born, I would be remiss if I glossed over the opportunity to make a really strong connection to this group and to share some of the top takeaways that I learned while managing ecosystems in more of a suburban context in Metro Detroit. So when I graduated from the University of Michigan with a degree in environmental sciences and a specialization in land use management, an extremely generous man by the name of Paul Muley, who was the chief of natural resources at the Metro Parks at the time, he gave me a chance and gave me a job and hired me to help him coordinate ecosystem management efforts within the 13 different parks that you see speckled around Detroit, which together end up encompassing about 24,000 acres of land in Metro Detroit. Now, I could drone on and on and on all day about all of the things that I learned while working in that role and in that context, but since we don't have all day, I will essentially just summarize my experience by stating that the top takeaways from the 2 years that I spent managing ecosystems in this more suburban context are that things really, in terms of ecosystem management, you really need to be thinking about managing an entire ecosystem, where if we're looking to restore a prairie, if we're looking to restore a forest or a wetland or a lake or a river, it's best to really look at that entire ecosystem rather than segments of it, which was pretty doable since the Metro Parks owned and therefore managed and had control over the majority of the entire ecosystem for the most part. So it made the management of those ecosystems a little bit easier. The second big thing that I learned from working with the Metro Parks and working in Southeast Michigan is how much people matter to the management of our ecosystems. I needed to get people off of the bike paths and the boat launches and the beaches and into the wet mesic prairies, etc., to help connect them to the work we were doing, not just because I needed more hands and help getting the ecosystem management work done, but also because I recognized the importance of connecting people to these ecosystems and to the management and stewardship of them, because that then increased their level of awareness, it increased their appreciation, and therefore their support of that kind of resource and those conservation efforts. So point blank, I really recognized how important people were for saving the planet. And although I would have loved to stay in the lush green blue state of Michigan, another thing that I realized around that same time, which led me down the path that I'm on now, is really the importance of cities in conservation efforts. So after working for a couple years with the Metro Parks and having those revelations that I just mentioned, I ended up returning to school, went back to the University of Michigan to gain a deeper understanding of ecology by getting a Master of Science in Ecology. And then I coupled that with a Master of Landscape Architecture degree so that I could essentially understand how to more mindfully connect people to those ecosystems. And it was during that time back in school that I really recognize that the major environmental challenges like biodiversity loss and habitat fragmentation, well, they were stemming from us and from our human development. And at that exact same time was when the majority of the world's population tipped and started living in cities, in these urban contexts. So we kind of knew that more of this human development was going to be happening in the future. Dun, 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 right? So when I finished my schooling, I decided that really the best place for me to move to help save the planet was Los Angeles. So I moved to the second largest urban area in the country about 10 years ago to figure out how to help manage ecosystems in an urban context, a really, really super highly urban context. So I live now in the heart of the city and in the heart of the greater LA region, along the banks of the Los Angeles River, which you can see trickling down the center of this slide, which looks a lot different than our Michigan rivers. And I moved here because I really see LA and its river as this quintessential example of how we've converted natural systems into infrastructural systems in our cities. And therefore, it's kind of serving as this perfect laboratory for determining, well, how do you move forward in the future in a way that integrates both of those things and creates what I like to call symbiotic cities, these places where people, plants, and other animals can coexist. Now, Los Angeles might be better known for the glitz, glamour, and gossip of Hollywood and for being world champions of baseball, go Dodgers, than it is for being world champions of biodiversity, but it is, and we are. So believe it or not, Los Angeles is actually located in one of 36 global biodiversity hotspots, ranking this area on par with places like Madagascar and the tropical Andes. Pretty cool, right? So part of what qualifies a place as being a biodiversity hotspot is that there are at least 1,500 plants that are found growing in that area that are found growing nowhere else in the world. And one of the reasons that we have such high diversity of plants and animals in this part of the world is in part because we're in a Mediterranean climate. No, Los Angeles is not located in a desert. We actually have a Mediterranean climate that we're within. And that essentially means that it consists of hot, dry summers, followed then by cool, wet winters. So it provides these really prime conditions for so many different plants and animals to flourish. And not only are we located in a Mediterranean climate, but our local topographic conditions also contribute to this diversity as well. Did you know that the city of Los Angeles is actually the only city in the US that has a major mountain range running through it, the Santa Monica Mountains? Pretty cool. So unlike most of the mountain ranges in California or across the country that you can think about that are oriented north-south, you think about the Sierra Nevada mountains, you think about the Rocky Mountains, the Appalachian Mountains, they're all north-south orientation, right? Well, the transverse ranges, which include the Santa Monica Mountains, the San Gabriel Mountains, and the San Bernardino Mountains, which you can see on this map, they have this very unique east-west orientation because, yep, we like to do things a little bit differently out here on the West Coast and especially down here in LA. And it's actually this unique topography that then creates a very diverse array of microclimates, these different pockets of varying temperature and precipitation and other environmental conditions across LA's landscape that then end up resulting in an array of assemblages of chaparral and coastal sage scrub, of different forests and woodlands and other natural vegetation communities. And it's this array of natural community types that contains a high diversity of plant species, which then in turn provide habitat for a high diversity of animal life that also then calls Los Angeles home. And you can see from this map clear evidence that there's a lot of nature and biodiversity in LA. No, this is not an excerpt from a Magic Eye book from back in the 90s or 2000s. This is actually a screen capture from iNaturalist, which is an online community science platform for recording observations of nature and is a great resource for people like me who are working in urban contexts. And each dot that you see speckled on this slide represents a plant, animal, or fungi that has been observed. And that's a lot of observations. In LA County alone, which is only just a portion of the map shown here, we have over 4,000 species of plants and animals, over 50 of which are actually considered to be endangered. So yeah, I hate to bring the party down a little bit, but the other qualifying factor of what it takes to be listed as a biodiversity hotspot, aside from having a lot of biodiversity, is that actually 70% or more of that original natural vegetation in that area has been lost, mostly due to human development. And the biodiversity hotspot that Los Angeles is specifically situated in is called the California Floristic Province, which you can see illustrated in watercolor in red on the map on the left. And you can see that it stretches from about southern Oregon all the way down to Baja California. And of the entire population of people that are living within that California Floristic Province hotspot, the majority of people are actually concentrated down here with me in the greater Los Angeles area, which has provided challenges for plants and animals since they have to compete with us in our development for food, water, and other resources that are necessary for their survival. And the plants and animals in this urban context are living in a variety of different ecosystem types and on a variety of different land types and ownerships. And the land within the city of LA isn't all actually owned by the city. In fact, the majority of land is actually privately owned, as you can see from the vast amount of white space on the map on the left. And with over 3.5 million people living within just the city of Los Angeles, representing a diverse array of cultures and ethnicities and having incomes that range from well below the poverty line to some of the wealthiest people in the country and world, it's really quite challenging to have just one cohesive vision or way of managing and maintaining biodiversity across this urban landscape, because everyone kind of just likes to do their own thing on their own private property. So even though the city of LA doesn't own every parcel of property within our boundary, we can and we do influence what happens on both public and private property. And the city of Los Angeles represents a pretty significant stakeholder in saving the planet in this region, since we take up such a large land area. The city of LA, which you can see shown in red within the white county, stretches over 500 square miles in size, representing, again, this huge, huge portion of land and water that's worth protecting and restoring and conserving and enhancing, not only for the benefits that it provides us here locally, but again, due to that global significance. So how are we doing this? How am I doing this? How am I helping to manage LA's urban ecosystem? And how can a city like LA help to manage urban ecosystems in a way that better balances biodiversity with human development? Well, after living and working in a place like LA for the past decade now, I have come to realize that there's a pretty typical process to how things get done. Cities and counties, they serve as these authorities that influence what occurs within its jurisdictional boundaries. And the way that they do this is typically through this super simplified process that's shown on the slide here. We don't just jump right into permitting and building things. The process of getting things done in a city starts with planning, and a lot of it. Plans are really the first step and the foundation for creating change or addressing the health and resilience of the urban ecosystem, and are generated to provide an overarching vision and outline a set of goals and propose opportunities for what should be done. And Los Angeles is really at the forefront of setting a lot of ambitious plans and goals related to maintaining biodiversity, enhancing the urban forest, saving an almost extirpated population of mountain lion, revitalizing a 51 long mile, concretized river. The list goes on. And so I just want to take a couple minutes to highlight a couple of the most relevant plans and reports that I've been involved in at the City of LA that really relate quite well to ecosystem management. The first of which is LA's Green New Deal or Sustainability Plan. Now, this plan, which was created by former Mayor Garcetti, is an overarching governing document that outlines a vision for what the city should be like under that leadership. And this plan actually has an entire chapter devoted to urban ecosystems and resilience. And within it outlines a set of ambitious targets, such as achieving and maintaining no net loss of native biodiversity by 2023. So it's due to this target being written down in this plan, coupled then with the fact that our city council introduced a biodiversity motion that then catalyzed the city of LA to begin taking action to protect biodiversity. And one of the first ways that we did that was then to create a series of biodiversity reports. So we actually opted to create a customized biodiversity index that would be measured over time to assess progress on the no net loss of native biodiversity goal that, again, was outlined in our sustainability plan and the Green New Deal. The LA City Biodiversity Index, it takes inspiration from the Singapore Index on cities' biodiversity, if y'all are familiar with that one. But our index ends up having a hierarchical structure with 3 different themes, 8 indicators, and 25 metrics. And aside from being generated by us within the city, it was also a really collaborative effort with a lot of external stakeholders who are part of our Biodiversity Expert Council. And the final customized LA City Biodiversity Index, I did mention it has 3 themes, and those 3 themes are native species protection, social equity, and governance and management of biodiversity. The indicators that I mentioned, they cover things like habitat quality, indicator species, threats to native biodiversity, access to biodiversity, education, community action, governance, and management. And so collectively, these indicators and our 25 metrics do a wonderful job of comprehensively assessing what's happening with our natural ecosystems and how are we improving community access and education, and how are we incorporating biodiversity considerations and policy into the work that we're doing at the city. So I'm happy to share that in early June of last year, 2022, we published the LA Biodiversity Index Baseline Report, which essentially showcases the first ever assessment of the LA City Biodiversity Index. And woo-wee, look, we scored a whopping 37 out of 110 points, suggesting that, yeah, we've got a lot of work to do here to better protect our biodiversity. And we are actively now taking steps to increase that overall score of the index and to better integrate biodiversity into policies and practices. And we're doing this through the help and support of community members and other city departments. So as part of the Biodiversity Index effort, we are engaging with community scientists across the region to help us log in observations of our indicator species on community science platforms like iNaturalist. We've also been partnering with our public libraries to promote community science participation via an annual LA BioBlitz Challenge, which is a super exciting challenge that teaches the public about biodiversity, and in particular then engages them with the indicator species. And we've also developed a slew of different outreach materials and programs to help teach the public about these species and encourage them to record observations of them in the wild, such as this indicator species booklet that we collaborated with UCLA on that showcases all 37 of LA's charismatic umbrella indicator species, and this postcard that then helps folks track which species they end up seeing. And we're working on other educational materials to raise public awareness and increase the number of observations of these species using community science platforms as well. And here you can see from the 2022 BioBlitz results that over 8,000 observations were made, and we had over 1,000 different participants. So pretty good for some first starters. And aside from involving the community in the work that we're doing to address biodiversity, we are also working with the various departments within the city of LA that are listed here on this slide to incorporate biodiversity considerations into operations, programs, projects, and policies. And there are some pretty cool initiatives underway that we're coming up with here within the city, including things like our Streets LA department, looking to convert our extensive network of medians across the city into biodiversity medians. Working with our Department of Water and Power to convert linear infrastructure like transmission corridors, which you see going across the entire region here, into pollinator habitat and corridors. And then working with the City Planning Department to create policies such as land use regulations, which then address habitat and biodiversity. So that really takes us to the next step in the process, right? I talked a little bit about the plans, and then I talked about how that led to some of the reports, and now how those plans and reports then are helping to catalyze policy initiatives. And policies are really the teeth behind things. The plans and the reports are the, yeah, you just should do X, Y, and Z. The policies are the, you shall do X, Y, and Z. So it's really important to be not only providing plans and reports related to these things, but to be following them up with policies so that we make sure that, again, we're mandating certain things that make sense for the transformation of our city. So when I moved to LA with the dream of helping to revitalize the LA River and manage LA's urban ecosystems, I would have never guessed that 10 years later, I'd be working for the city of LA or with the planning department. But come to find out, planners are actually some of the key ecosystem managers within the urban context because they have the ability to regulate land use through things like zoning, general plans, community plans, specific plans. Did I mention we have a lot of plans? And through things like policies such as ordinance regulations. And those things can be put on both public and private property, which is important because if we look back to this map, it becomes quite evident that it would be really difficult to achieve that no net loss of biodiversity in the city if we were only able to address it on public lands. Since, as you can see from the green speckles on this map, there's some public spaces, but again, they're not as much as the private, and they're a little bit fragmented. So we really have to think about enlisting the help and support of the private parcels as well. And the creation of policies for private properties is extremely important because of the way that we've been developing on these private parcels in a place like LA in ways that unfortunately jeopardize the biodiversity that we have here. So in the past, which you can see in the dashed circle on the right, we created homes that were much smaller in size and more mindfully nested within nature without causing much disturbance, whereas current homes, which can be seen on the left, are much larger in size and require sites to be cleared of all or most existing flora and fauna. And the graph on the left shows the development trends of house sizes over the past decades in ecologically significant areas of Los Angeles. And as you can see, that house size has more than doubled in the last 60 years. So unlike development in the past, today's development result in private properties that are often cleared of existing native vegetation. They're graded in ways that affect the natural soils and topography. They're built lot line to maximize our homes and habitat, reducing the amount of habitat and space that remains for wildlife to live and move in between such developments. So these are the issues that really need to be addressed immediately to stop the decline and degradation of the biodiversity that we have here within the city and region, which is exactly what the planning department tackled through the creation of the Wildlife Ordinance. So the Wildlife Ordinance proposes regulations on private property that will first and foremost look to minimize land disturbance via standards related to grading, residential floor area, lot coverage, and structure height. We're also looking to retain and promote habitat and biodiversity via regulations related to native and also significant trees. And we're also developing regulations that will improve wildlife health and movement by addressing things like fencing, walls, lighting, windows, and trash enclosures. The regulations are being proposed first to be implemented in a pilot area within the city of LA known as the Wildlife District, which you can see outlined in black in the middle of the Santa Monica mountain range. This area serves as a really critical stepping stone and an essential corridor for wildlife movement through the city and on a regional scale. And by implementing the land use regulations in this proposed district first, the city can then determine if these sets of regulations are then adequately achieving the intended outcomes, and then expand the regulations to other protection areas for wildlife, or PAWs, that have been identified within the city of LA, which are shown in blue-green on this map. So if and hopefully when, fingers crossed, such a proposed ordinance gets adopted, and then hopefully expanded to the other PAWs within the city, we will then be able to better ensure that the plants and animals in our hillsides and in these ecologically significant areas of LA are able to live and move in between the mountain ranges and these patch habitats in the region, which is essential for mixing genes in order to keep populations healthy and is key for addressing climate change when we know that range shifts are inevitable. So these types of policies, again, are super important since they in turn influence projects that built reality of the city that we see around us, and hopefully do so in a way that is a bit more mindful of the unique and important biodiversity that we have here in a place like LA. Now, another effort that I helped to catalyze and oversee that influences projects that I thought would be relevant to touch on is mapping habitat suitability and connectivity within our urban context, essentially to aid in the review of proposed development projects for potential impact on biological and ecological resources. And this effort really started actually with the mountain lion. Due to habitat fragmentation that's caused by human development, the Southern California subpopulation of mountain lion, which you can see that's located below the green line on the map on the right, is being petitioned to be listed as threatened under the California Endangered Species Act. So per our California Environmental Quality Act, otherwise known as CEQA, we need to review proposed development projects for their potential impact on mountain lion habitat and wildlife corridors that they use. So to properly respond to the proposed listing of the mountain lion, I helped the city of LA to answer two questions. First and foremost, where are the habitat and connectivity opportunities for the mountain lion within the city of LA? Essentially, so that we could know where to review projects for those potential impacts. And then secondly, what the heck do we do when we are reviewing projects to see if they're having potentially an impact on mountain lion habitat and connectivity? So to help identify areas within the city of LA where mountain lions could be expected to live and move, I worked with local mountain lion experts such as the National Park Service and Occidental College, who are researching this unique semi-urban population to determine the best sub-boundary within the city of LA where the mountain lion could be most expected to occur and traverse, which you can see here on this map is the area in color. And it's mostly our hillsides and mountain areas within the city. Then within the mountain lion boundary itself, based on extensive literature review and a set of expert interviews that I helped to conduct, I worked then with our GIS department to create a composite heat map that scores every parcel within the boundary for mountain lion habitat suitability. So the table on the left shows a summary of the data inputs, which include things like species observations, vegetation, hydrology, topography. The result of then plugging all of those data inputs into GIS was the creation of a composite heat map, which you can see on the right, that shows this gradient of suitable habitat specifically for mountain lions within the city of Los Angeles. And if we zoom into that map a bit more, you can see that the areas shown in bright yellow or chartreuse, those are the areas that are identified as being most suitable habitat for mountain lions. Whereas then the blues and purples, they're still pretty suitable, but a little bit less so. And then the areas in white are places within the city that we don't really expect the mountain lion to be able to reach, given constraints of roads and our development. Now, the score that a parcel of property receives on this map then correlates to the level of biological assessment that the city would then require for that proposed project. So in addition to developing the map itself, I also then worked with the planning department to help standardize our biological reporting tiers and requirements so that it becomes a lot easier for planners who are non-scientists to click on a parcel that a project is being proposed on, like the photo in the top left, to see the habitat suitability score for that parcel, like the photo in the middle shows, and then to request the appropriate level of biological reporting based on that score by providing the project applicant with a standardized template that then correlates again to that score and to the level of review that we want to have on that said project. And this method of reviewing projects has actually helped to increase the efficacy so much within the city that we are now working to expand the methodology beyond just the mountain lion and include additional listed species, and then to rerun it at a citywide scale so that every parcel of property within the city of LA can have this kind of citywide habitat suitability score associated with it so that we can do a much better job of, again, then assessing the impact on resources. Now, aside from mapping the habitat suitability for the mountain lion and now for other creatures too, I've also been working to map ecological connectivity within the urban context, not only to help address the listing of the mountain lion, but also to better inform how to maintain and enhance biodiversity in the city, since really connecting those patch habitats across the landscape matrix is essential for ecosystem health. So what you're seeing here on this map is a raster-based output from Omniscape, which uses circuit theory to highlight a pathway that energy, or in this case, animals, will take. So essentially where they need to or can move. So the areas of high current or connectivity are the light bright yellows streaking across our hillsides and mountains. And then the areas of lower current, those darker pinks and purples fading into the blue basin, that's areas where there's less connectivity. And if we zoom into this area in particular, which is within the Santa Monica mountain range, and overlay the radio collar data of mountain lions in our region, which are the dots on this map, you can see that animals are living in these more wildland areas, kind of on the western portion of our Santa Monica mountains, but they're having a pretty hard time then moving further east across this vertical line that you see on the map, which happens to be the 405 freeway. So it's a part of our urban infrastructure that we built to better connect us across the landscape, but is something that is fragmenting the natural landscape and impeding animals from being able to move and connect across the city as well. So this connectivity mapping that I've been working on is really helping to identify key pinch points within our city and region where wildlife are trying to move but getting stuck, and therefore where additional connections such as wildlife bridges or undercrossings should be built, as well as to help identify essential areas that really need to be protected from development in order to enhance the ecological health and connectivity of our region. So hopefully now you get a sense of how the plans and reports and policies and procedures all work together to influence projects that are occurring within a place like LA, but don't worry, not done yet. I've got a couple more final points that I really want to make a plug for that I find to be essential feeding into this kind of traditional process. So another thing that I focus on as an urban ecologist is ensuring that our community of scientists are tapped into and providing their research and expertise into every step of the process. I work really hard to make sure that I make connections with nonprofits like the Nature Conservancy, with institutions like the Natural History Museum of LA County, agencies like the National Park Service, academic institutions like UCLA, USC, and others, to then generate the research and the data needed to best inform the plans and the policies and the projects that are occurring within our urban ecosystem, since there's still so much that is unknown about urban environments. So by working more closely together, researchers and government authorities can hopefully better align our work to then more closely and more deliberately address urban biodiversity. And the last thing that I'll touch on is, again, how important people are to every part of this process through the creation of socio-ecological systems that will really ensure the success and sustainability of efforts as they move from plans to policies to projects. And the example that I'll use to explain what I mean by this is not actually from the work that I do wearing my City of Los Angeles badge, but rather from a nonprofit that I started and run on my nights and weekends and my days off called Grown in LA. So about the same time that I moved to LA, the US Army Corps of Engineers issued a plan that proposes over 700 acres of restoration projects along 11 miles of the 51-mile LA River. This was a huge announcement as we were finally moving towards that reintegration of the natural riparian ecosystem, then with the more infrastructural system that we had engineered and created. But when everybody else was celebrating, I kind of scratched my head since I was identifying a potential complication of moving from that ambitious plan to then successfully actually implement the projects. After doing a back of the envelope calculation, I realized that for restoration projects of that size, of over 700 acres, it would require millions of native plants, which caused me to ask the question, well, where are we going to get all of those plants from, since that supply didn't currently and still doesn't exist in the LA area? And I was told that since I was the one that identified the problem, I needed to be the one to fix it. So I did. And I saw, or I'm working to fix it. I shouldn't say it's fixed yet. I saw the need for more plants to be produced here locally. And then I also identified other needs that we had here in a place like Los Angeles too. We needed a lot more better outdoor educational opportunities for our kids. We needed more jobs for Angelenos. So I helped to conceive of a socio-ecological system that provides benefits both to the environment and to our socio and political kind of systems as well. So Grown in LA is really helping to increase the amount of locally produced native plants while simultaneously connecting Angelenos to this important conservation work. And it really starts with the seed, literally. Rather than just focusing on the end product of allowing the public to show up to that project opening, the ribbon cutting itself, why not start engaging them from square one, from actually being a part of collecting the seed that then is going to be grown and then installed and planted in an area like that public park? So I helped to bring together a collaborative group of experts that are now calling ourselves Seed LA, who meet monthly with the mission of working together to increase the availability of regionally adapted native seed that then goes into enhancing and conserving the ecological diversity of the greater LA area. And that native seed that we are collaboratively collecting together can then be provided to many different nurseries and propagated within those nurseries that are locally here within Los Angeles. So another part of my work with Grown in LA was then to start some nurseries and provide a proof of concept of how we can create more nurseries within the region on underutilized sites using best management practices that actually repurpose elements from our industrial waste stream. You can see that I built the tables here off of decommissioned trash cans that either had too much graffiti or were rotted out on the bottom, so that we could figure out how to have many more of these growing locations accessible and affordable to our community residents here within LA. And then I've also worked to develop partnerships with existing nonprofits like the National Wildlife Federation and City Plants to then distribute these locally grown plants through our community via schoolyard greenings and free tree giveaway programs. And we're now also working on our first collaborative contract grow for a pretty awesome stormwater management and habitat enhancement demonstration project that's along the LA River that's in partnership with the Nature Conservancy and California State Parks. And I'm also in the midst of working with a lot of various partners in the region to determine how to create green collar workforce development opportunities that are focused on training our own community members to do these seed collections, to grow these plants, to install these plants, and then to maintain and steward them over time so that we can really ensure that these projects that we're investing in that are building biodiversity and that are converting gray into green infrastructure are successful in the long run because they have the right kind of specialists caring for them and the right kind of people committed to giving a rip about them, not only because they enjoy doing so, but also because they're employed to do so. So all of these various efforts that I just mentioned really aim to involve people along every step of the process as we go again from plans all the way to built projects that really are, aiming to transform our city into a more livable place for people, plants, and other animals. So hopefully through this presentation and the brief overview of the various efforts underway within the city of LA, which honestly just scratch the surface of everything that I've been up to and that we're up to out here on the West Coast, I hope that you've come to realize that there are many different steps in the process of getting things done and a lot of different approaches to how we can and should be managing our urban ecosystems, especially in a place like LA. And that really just focusing on one aspect of the process does us a disservice, since each step is really reliant on many others that must also be taken into consideration, addressed, and coordinated, kind of an entire ecosystem in itself. So that's really what my work focuses here on in LA. My mission is to get as many people to recognize the opportunities to save the planet that we have in a place, even like LA, and how within reach it is to create that concept of a symbiotic city by integrating all of these different parts together from the social, political, economic, and of course, the ecological systems. So although at times I do feel a little bit like a fish out of water being an ecologist in LA, I'm not alone in this effort to manage LA's urban ecosystem. There are plenty of other pioneers that are helping to chart new courses within their disciplines, their organizations, their departments, so on and so forth. And since we've done a pretty good job of siloing efforts in the past into different departments and sectors for efficiency's sake, we must really make a concerted effort to connect these efforts together and to take a much more integrated systems-based approach to ensuring that every step or aspect is really synced up in a way that will enhance the urban ecosystem. And that's exactly what I love doing here as an urban ecologist, to help make those connections and help create those types of systems. And not only will this kind of cross-pollination, as I like to call it, increase the efficacy of our efforts, but I also like to think it makes for a much more enjoyable experience and outcome. I oftentimes liken my work and making these connections within the urban ecosystem to music, where when you think of one note being played in isolation, it kind of holds little value or meaning. But then when multiple notes are connected, the result is music, where some of the best harmonies are found and appreciated. And if we also work to manage entire ecosystems, such as the entire LA River and its tributaries, which is shown on this map, it will inherently ensure that we are creating more equitable investment, since these landscape scale systems stretch across many different diverse demographics, ensuring that solutions for making our city more livable are not just focused within one community, one income bracket, one race, but really span the entire spectrum and benefit all Angelenos. And the solutions that we identify and employ here in a place like LA can then hopefully be shared with other cities across the country that are also facing similar situations where development is impacting plants, animals, and ecological processes, and then hopefully be shared with the world, making a global impact on the health of the planet that we all call home. So with that, I want to thank you all for listening to me steamroll you with a lot of information about managing urban ecosystems in LA. And since, again, I mentioned I was only able to really scratch the surface of a lot of different things, I'm super excited to engage in some question and answer and/or discussion with you all now.
Thank you so very much, Kat. That was amazing. So much great information in there. And I also just want to point out very casually that you mentioned, oh yeah, on top of all this other stuff that I'm doing, I also run this entire night nonprofit on my nights and weekends. And so just to not gloss over that point, incredibly impressive. And I also have to give a shout out to the music analogy, because Bob, who you had met as a part of our team, is also a musician, and I've done some work in music. And so music analogies have become pretty prevalent at the Stewardship Network. So I have to apologize, but also I will not apologize, because it's a great analogy in many different ways. So thank you so much for the presentation. I've got so many thoughts and ideas. I want to maybe give you one or two, and then definitely responsive to folks in the Q&A. So thank you everybody for adding your questions there. So one question that I had, and this was earlier on in the presentation, and forgive me if you mentioned some of this, but I would be interested. You talk about managing, the entire ecosystem rather than specific parts of it. And we know that ecosystems don't follow the same rules and lines that we create as humans in terms of counties and cities and all of that stuff. And the shape of LA is remarkable, right? The way that it is shaped I was like, I did not know that. That is a remarkable shape for a city to be in. And so I was curious about the ways that you collaborate with like other entities outside of LA, because obviously a lot of these ecosystems will stretch beyond where those lines are. So just like how much does that play into your work versus how much is more internal to LA? And just curious a little bit about that.
Yeah, you are hitting the nail on the head. And what's actually even more fascinating that you might not have picked up on the city of LA boundary, we actually have cities engulfed within our city boundary. Like Beverly Hills is not actually a part of LA, it's its own city. Culver City, same thing. Santa Monica, it's a very, very, when again, you're looking at what I'm normally used to looking at, these ecological systems, you pull those into a map where and you're looking at those. Yeah, they're crossing so many different jurisdictions, from different municipalities to then unincorporated parts of LA. And then again, within those areas, we've got tons of different landowners. So even when it comes to our public properties, it's not just that we at the city are owning them. We've got National Park Service property here. We've got Cal State Parks property. So to really get at your question of like, how then do you do anything? And this was what I was picking up on, is like, my life managing the ecosystems in the metro parks, again, were a little bit easier, because it was kind of like, well, the prairie's all within our jurisdiction, so let's light it up. And, all I have to get is one person's approval. Whereas it's like, oh, now if you want to be, again, like revitalizing the LA River, you've got not just the river running through the city of LA, but you've got 19 other cities that then you've got to coordinate with, and then the county. So it really becomes important to make those kind of connections. And that's kind of, I guess, what I was getting at in the end of my presentation. Like, what I've recognized my role as an ecologist in this context is is to make those connections. I'm constantly meeting with people and just hearing, what are you up to? You're working for a nonprofit over here in these hillsides. Tell me what's going on with your world. You know, you're a government agency over here. What do you got going on? And I then help to make those connections of saying, oh, okay, well, you guys are generating data about this over here, or you're trying to create this kind of planning effort over here, or you're doing this over here. And I try as hard as I can to sync all of that up. And so I'm usually known as the person who, again, cross-pollinates and then who brings people together in these kind of collaborative meetings, being like, oh, we should all be talking together. Like here, like let's get together, or let's have a Zoom call and let's figure out how your plan feeds into then my effort, so on and so forth. So it really is then reliant on people just doing that kind of dot connecting, or else, yeah, the silos would remain and it would continue to be so super segmented in the way that we're doing things.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Thank you. I'm thinking of the mountain lion example, and maybe we'll touch more on that later, but it's so many factors, I'm sure, that play into something like that. So Kevin Brown has a couple great questions for us. So one of them is, how effective are encouraged and voluntary stewardship activities for protecting biodiversity on private properties? At what point are regulations required? We're going through the same issues you've discussed on Southern Vancouver Island, and LA's work is very valuable. Thank you.
I would say, I mean, I kind of mentioned again in the presentation that we've got a whole spectrum of individuals living here in LA, which is what I love about a place like LA. It's kind of this come one, come all. It is pretty difficult then to just rely on people voluntarily doing things. Yeah, we've got a huge contingency of people who are supporting native biodiversity. They get it, they're doing it, they're creating their certified wildlife habitats, they're, you know, daylighting their streams, whatever it is that they're doing. But then you've got a lot of other people who are blind to biodiversity at this point. I failed to mention that the wildlife district that I mentioned, the regulations would be going into effect first and foremost. That's the Hollywood Hills, people. So that's like some of the wealthiest people in Los Angeles. And, you know, some of the people that have unique perspectives on, you know, maybe they care a little bit more about their pocketbook than they do about trees. Whereas then again, you get the people who are like, I'm living in this area because I want to be living in a hillside area with trees and nature. So we really have found the need to have not just kind of incentives and guidelines be put forth towards what we should be doing to address biodiversity. But that's really, again, why we had to go down the route of creating an ordinance, because we were recognizing that we needed to have the shall. We needed to have the you must do X, Y, and Z. And so I really do encourage folks to think about ways that you could politely interject some of that kind of transformation on private property through things like regulations, because I do think that, you know, sometimes we just need to be told what to do and you know, stick to it that way.
It is sad but true. And then just another follow-up and a point you had brought up, you know, the aspects of your work where you really try to engage with different members of the community, people from different backgrounds, and, you know, the holistic kind of strategy of public engagement. And Kevin was asking specifically, how do you consult with local First Nations and incorporate their insights and perspectives in biodiversity enhancement efforts?
Yeah, and this is a great question too, and something that we really are needing to catch up on a lot, but we're, you know, hitting the ground running. There are a lot of different tribal nations located here within the greater LA area. So it's been amazing in the last, especially like few years, how much even, you know, agencies like the city of LA now have the point people that we know who to reach out to then, you know, be able to enlist the help and support and get the perspectives of these people who have been, you know, historically marginalized and not listened to. And what I love about working with tribal communities is the fact that they get it. They get the fact that they talk about how plants and animals are our ancestors and how they're so much smarter and wiser than we are. And they see these ecosystems, you know, and the processes. And so it's always so helpful to and also inspiring to work with them, because they then can also help to provide that kind of perspective where as we're fighting for, yes, we need more affordable housing and we need to fight homelessness and these like very hyper like social issues, it's great to have other people as part of society come in and say, aside from just thinking about humans, we also need to be thinking about, again, plants and animals, because it relates to us as humans, but it also then relates to us as being just a part of the, these ecosystems and processes. So yeah, we're doing a lot to consistently engage with the tribal communities, and I'm excited to hopefully see even more of that in the coming future.
Yeah, and it sounds like establishing those connections is obviously the necessary first step, right? So finding the point person and understanding how to connect those dots and the bureaucracies of who's making the decisions and stuff, and then building those relationships, building that trust and that sharing of information. I mean, it all just makes us better in all the things that we're doing. So that's great. So talking a little bit about the ways that you engage the public, because I'm thinking about Kevin's first question, and just like I love the initiatives that you were talking about that were about public engagement and giving the public agency about getting involved in these projects. And that is a part of the sentiment around the Spring Challenge as well, is that we're trying to incentivize and encourage people to do things on their own private property, to do volunteer events, to establish a community, and to feel like they're a part of a larger initiative and a larger whole, like as opposed to these individual efforts that can feel so daunting and feels like, does this even matter, and all of that kind of thing. So I guess one of my questions was on more of like a personal level, but also, professionally and at scale, how do you validate landowners that might feel overwhelmed by the scale of the problems that we're facing, or maybe they feel like the individual work that they're doing on their properties isn't as important? Like, what are the things that you tell them, or what are the ways that you encourage them to get involved, or maybe to inspire them to get involved in the first place?
That's a great question. We luckily have so many like weird examples in LA of like, oh, there's this asphalt parking lot that is the school playground in the middle of Los Angeles, like the, most developed area. And guess what? We then removed, like a tiny little portion of that asphalt and put some native plants in it, and a burrowing owl showed up out of nowhere. It's like we have these really, and we had P22, I mean, rest in peace, like, ugh. But we had him as this great mascot of showing like, we have a mountain lion. We are one of 2 cities in the world that have major cats living in them. And we loved him. We were like, no, we want him to be a resident with us. Like, we are that crazy. So I think we have a lot of great examples, and that's made my life a lot easier, because it's easy to then point to, even going back to the example of the Hollywood Hills, it's like I knew of a couple properties of people who had these beautiful mansions and then also have, tons of native plants, and they've got bobcats coming through their backyard. And so to be able to then show people, oh, you can have this like very, nice lifestyle and still be able to, on your own individual property, make a huge impact by planting these plants. And then again, connect it to say, well, who came to, your bird feeder, or who came to your native plant and was eating the seed, or who came to your water source. And so I think that I lean on a lot of those, like the proof is in the pudding, look at this example. And I try to weave those stories in as much as possible, because then people really understand that, yeah, you can make one small change on your private property. Like I added a bird bath during the pandemic to my front yard. The amount of bird diversity and increase that I got was insanely awesome. I was getting acorn woodpeckers coming, from these patch habitats, across the freeway that had oaks in them and things like that. So yeah, I love to lean on real world examples. And like I said, we have so many good ones in LA of like, wow, how did that thing grow here? Or how did that thing get here? That it helps people to recognize that even if you think something is impossible, Mother Nature has a way. She'll figure out how to help us out.
That's amazing. The stories are so powerful. And we have a group I think of near us is Urban Neighborhood Initiatives, which is in the Springwells neighborhood of Detroit. And the way that they do vacant lot stewardship, taking a property that was once a dumping ground, turning it into bird habitat, so amazing. And so I could continue talking with you forever about this. So I will have to pause now and start to do our outro. But thank you so very much. And thank you to everybody in the chat that was sharing your comments and questions. We really appreciate it. So allow me to just get back into my share screen mode here. All right, so once again, as a reminder that we are currently within the spring challenge, and so encouraging, including Kat, if any of your programs are, relevant or qualify for the spring challenge, we'd love to have you participate. But encouraging folks to visit our website and to report and/or donate. It started on April 12th and will be going through June 30th. So our next webcast will be on June 14th, 2023, same time, Eastern Time Zone's noon hour. And we will be, the presentation will be the Phragmites Adaptive Management Framework with Taja R. Tucker Silva. And so we hope to see you there and encourage you to register via our website. And once again, thank you so much, Kat. Thank you, everybody that is viewing today. We're so grateful for you, and we hope that you have a great rest of the day and see you next month.